I stood alone in the control room, the hum of outdated machinery echoing around me. The dim light from the overhead bulbs cast long shadows, dancing across the dusty consoles. This place, once the nerve center of a top-secret military installation, had become my sanctuary, and now, the stage for a betrayal I never anticipated. 52 years. That's how long Margaret and I had been together. We met in college, both young and full of dreams. I pursued engineering, while she delved into cryptography. A shared passion for problem-solving brought us closer, and soon, we were inseparable. We married just before I was recruited into a classified government project, one that would define the rest of our lives. The government built a hidden city in the Nevada desert, a place that didn't exist on any map. It was designed to house the brightest minds working on projects deemed too sensitive for the public eye. Margaret and I moved there, dedicating our lives to our respective roles. She worked in code breaking, and I focused on maintaining the facility's intricate systems. As the years passed, the city's purpose diminished. The Cold War ended, and many of our colleagues left. But we stayed, finding comfort in the isolation and the memories we had built. The government eventually declassified the site, turning it into a museum. Margaret volunteered to guide tours, sharing stories of our past with curious visitors. Then came Daniel. He arrived under the guise of a historian, eager to document the facility's history. Tall, charismatic, and with a keen interest in Margaret's tales, he quickly became a regular presence. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, Margaret had always been passionate about educating others. But subtle changes began to emerge. Margaret started dressing differently, wearing makeup she hadn't touched in years. She spent more time at the museum, often returning late. Our conversations grew sparse, filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. One evening, I decided to surprise her with dinner. I prepared her favorite meal and waited patiently. As passed, and there was no sign of her. Concerned, I drove to the museum, only to find it closed. Her car was parked outside, but the building was dark. I used my old access card to enter. The corridors were silent, the exhibits bathed in the soft glow of emergency lights. As I approached the control room, I heard muffled voices. Pushing the door open slightly, I saw them, Margaret and Daniel, locked in an embrace. My heart sank. The woman I had shared my life with, who had stood by me through decades of challenges, was now betraying me in the very place we had built our lives around. I retreated quietly, my mind racing. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it, a plan began to form. I knew this facility better than anyone. Its secrets were my secrets. If they wanted to play games in my domain, I would ensure they faced the consequences. Returning home, I accessed the old surveillance system. Though outdated, it still functioned. I set up discrete cameras and microphones, focusing on the control room and other key areas. Over the next few days, I gathered footage, each clip confirming the depth of their betrayal. But I needed more than just evidence. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions. I began by manipulating the facility's systems. Lights would flicker unexpectedly, doors would lock without warning, and eerie sounds echoed through the halls. Margaret mentioned these anomalies during our brief interactions, attributing them to the building's age. Then, I planted a series of encrypted messages within the museum's exhibits. They appeared as harmless historical notes but contained hidden codes that only someone with Margaret's expertise could decipher. The messages hinted at a hidden treasure, a secret left behind by the facility's original occupants. Margaret took the bait. She and Daniel began searching for this fabricated treasure, their curiosity piqued. I watched as they delved deeper into the facility's restricted areas, guided by the clues I had meticulously crafted. Finally, I led them to the old containment chamber, a room designed to simulate isolation during experiments. As they entered, the door sealed behind them. Through the surveillance feed, I saw their expressions shift from excitement to panic. Activating the intercom, I spoke calmly, "Welcome to the heart of our history." I hope you find what you're looking for. Their voices echoed, pleading for release, but I remained silent. After a few hours, I opened the door, allowing them to leave. They emerged, shaken and disoriented. Margaret confronted me that night, accusing me of endangering them. I responded with the footage, laying bare their betrayal. She broke down, tears streaming down her face, but I felt no sympathy. A home, once filled with love and shared memories, had become a battlefield. Trust had been shattered, and there was no going back. I packed my belongings and left the next morning, leaving behind a letter. Margaret. In the labyrinth of our shared past, I never imagined we'd lose our way. The echoes of our choices now reverberate through the halls we once called home. Goodbye, Richard. The desert mornings had a strange stillness. The kind of silence that seeps into your bones and makes every small sound feel amplified, like the crunch of sand under your boots or the hiss of wind as it snakes through the brittle remains of what was once a thriving government enclave. I stood at the edge of the compound that morning, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, staring at the horizon as if it held answers I couldn't find in my own home anymore. I hadn't slept. After I left the letter for Margaret and walked away from our house, I spent the night in my old workshop, a small metal building tucked near the fence line of the old testing grounds. It still had power, a cot, and my tools. More importantly, it had no memories. No scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets. No echoes of her laughter. Just silence, and the faint hum of dormant machinery. But I didn't come here to mourn. I came here to reset. The betrayal had cracked something in me, something I never thought could break. After 52 years, you assume you're beyond certain dangers. You believe you've weathered every storm. But I had been wrong. And now, I needed to control the storm. In the following days, I buried myself in work. I reactivated old surveillance networks, repurposed equipment from the decommissioned communication towers, and reconnected ancient terminals that had once monitored nuclear launch simulations. The government had pulled most of its secrets out when they shut down the facility, but they left the bones. And I knew where every one of them was buried. I studied Daniel carefully. He wasn't just a cheating scumbag, he was something else entirely. His questions during tours weren't casual. He asked about blueprints, power grids, classified wing access. Things no tourist would know to ask about. Margaret either didn't notice, or didn't care. Maybe she was so eager to feel wanted again that she ignored the obvious. Maybe she was in deeper than I wanted to admit. Either way, I needed to know what he was after. So I gave him a trail. The key to luring a man like Daniel is making him believe he's outsmarting you. I placed a fake classified file in one of the old server rooms, something that looked like a nuclear protocol document, complete with forged clearance markings. I left it tucked under the lid of a rusted maintenance box, conveniently visible through a cracked grate. Sure enough, within 48 hours, I saw Daniel returning to that wing under the pretense of research. He didn't even hesitate. I watched on the feed as he pocketed the file, looked around nervously, and left through the south exit, the one without cameras, or so he thought. I let him sit with it. I wanted him to feel safe, like he'd won. Meanwhile, I planted the next phase, recorded fragments of radio messages intercepted from archived communications. They were nonsense, stitched together from decades of junk code and training exercises. But they sounded real. Real enough to make someone like Daniel believe he had found the motherlode. I knew what he would do next, he'd come back, and he'd bring Margaret. Because now he believed there was more secrets, more information, more to exploit. And she was his ticket in. One night, I watched them meet outside the control tower. She smiled at him the way she used to smile at me. Soft, trusting. He leaned in, whispered something, and she laughed. It hit me like a punch in the chest, but I didn't turn away. I had to feel it. I needed that rage to sharpen my focus. They entered the tower and disappeared from view. I gave them time. Let them explore. Let them touch and whisper and scheme. And then, when they reached the sublevel where I had hidden the next set of files, I activated the sequence. It was subtle. Lights flickered. Door mechanisms clicked into lockdown. Emergency ventilation systems came on, creating a low, eerie hum. The kind that gets under your skin. Then I triggered the speakers. "Welcome back to Command Level 3, my voice echoed through the chamber. "This area is restricted to authorized personnel only. All activity is being monitored." I watched the panic set in. Daniel spun around, trying to find the source. Margaret froze, clutching a flashlight. She called out my name. Once. Twice. But I didn't answer. Instead, I dimmed the lights further and engaged the mirror mode, one-way windows around the chamber that made it feel like they were being watched from all angles. In truth, I was the only one watching. But the fear in their eyes told me the illusion worked. After 10 minutes, I released the lock. The doors opened with a hiss, and the lights returned to normal. They stumbled out, breathing hard, shaken. Later that night, Margaret came to my workshop. She looked older than I remembered. More fragile. She asked if I was the one who did it. I didn't lie. "Yes," I said. And that was just the beginning. She didn't respond. Just looked at me for a long time, then turned and walked into the dark. I returned to my monitors. Daniel was packing a bag in his quarters. He thought he could run. But I had eyes everywhere. I wasn't done yet. Daniel didn't leave right away, though he wanted to. That much was clear. I watched him from my terminal as he paced his quarters, shoved clothes into a duffel bag, checked his phone, then sat down and stared at the wall. He must have known running now would make him look guilty, worse, suspicious. And suspicion here, in a town built on paranoia, was poison. Margaret hadn't returned to the house either. She stayed with him that night. That said everything I needed to know. Whatever remained between us had crumbled completely. No more illusions. No more excuses. The person she had become was a stranger to me now. And Daniel, he was just the spark. The truth was, she'd been slipping away long before he arrived. He simply gave her permission to finish the fall. But I wasn't finished. My next step was to make Daniel paranoid. I needed him off balance, desperate, suspicious of everyone, including Margaret. Divide and conquer. That's what they taught us in psychological operations. You don't need to strike hard if you can make the enemy tear themselves apart. So I planted the first clue in Margaret's purse. It was a small flash drive, labeled simply 1987. Easy to miss, unless you were searching. Inside it was a carefully edited recording, footage of Daniel copying files from the facility's archives, spliced with audio snippets of phone calls he never made. Conversations about selling secrets, about her. It sounded real. It looked real. It was fake. But Margaret wouldn't know that. I left it on the hallway floor near her room. It didn't take long. She found it, plugged it into her laptop, and stared at the screen for almost 20 minutes. No movement. Just her eyes wide, her mouth set in a tight, unreadable line. Then she shut the laptop, stood up, and left. By the time she reached Daniel, I was already watching through the camera above his desk. "What is this?" she asked, holding up the flash drive. His confusion was genuine. "Where did you get that?" "You tell me," she snapped. "Have you been using me this whole time?" "No, Margaret, what are you talking about?" She stormed out. He followed her to the hallway, but she didn't look back. And that's when I knew, the seed was planted. Now I just had to let it grow. The next phase required more precision. I accessed the facility's internal email archive, still online thanks to a private server I maintained for emergencies. I composed a message from a fabricated identity, Dr. Leonard Voss, a former intelligence analyst with ties to the Department of Energy. The message, sent anonymously to Daniel's inbox, read, "I know who you are. You've been flagged. Leave now while you still can. They are coming." I timed the send for 3:12 a.m., the hour when fear whispers loudest. When the mind is too tired to argue with itself. Daniel opened the message less than 3 minutes after it arrived. He read it 3 times, then stared at the screen. He tried calling someone. The call didn't go through. I'd already blocked outside communications on the facility's Wi-Fi for his device only. The illusion of isolation would finish the job. By morning, Daniel was visibly unraveling. He skipped breakfast. He didn't report for his daily museum prep. He barely acknowledged Margaret when she passed him in the courtyard. She tried to speak to him, but he waved her off. He'd started to doubt her, too. Good. That afternoon, I activated the drone. It wasn't military, just a hobby drone I'd modified years ago. But it had a decent camera and could make unsettling noises when close enough. I flew it low over Daniel's window, then circled back and hovered outside the control tower. Margaret saw it from the front steps and called out his name. When he looked up and saw the drone, his face turned pale. Perfect. That night, I made contact. Using an old internal channel that connected the security officers to the PA system, I recorded a message and played it across the main compound. "Daniel, you've triggered something you don't understand. You opened the wrong door. Walk away, while you still can." Short, cold, anonymous. Enough to sound like someone inside the system, someone watching him. He didn't sleep that night. I know because I didn't either. I watched him from my monitor, sitting on the edge of his bed with a flashlight in hand, jumping at every creak in the wall. By now, Margaret was unraveling too. She cornered him in the cafeteria the next morning. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. Their body language said enough. She was scared. He was defensive. Neither trusted the other. Phase 3 had begun. Divide them. Break them. Then expose them both for who they truly were. And I had just the way to do it. Inside the old archives was a sealed box marked unprocessed assets. It was empty, had been for decades. But I'd rigged it with a pressure sensor and a low-volume transmitter that sent a signal to my terminal whenever the box was opened. I placed another fake document inside, this one marked Containment Breach Protocols, a Level 5 access only. It was pure fiction, but dressed in enough technical jargon and official formatting to appear dangerously real. I watched Daniel discover it late that evening, long after hours. He waited until Margaret was gone. He opened the box, scanned the document, and photographed every page with his phone. Now, he believed he held something critical, something worth stealing. That was all I needed. I prepared the final stage. Tomorrow, I would close the net. The next morning, the wind howled through the corridor outside my workshop like it was trying to warn me. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse in this place. Screaming turbines. Seismic alarms. Radiation sirens during Cold War drills. The air could shout all it wanted, I was already committed. Daniel had taken the bait. His phone was now filled with images of a fake Level 5 containment protocol that didn't exist. But in his mind, he believed he had something powerful, something forbidden. He thought he'd uncovered a secret buried for decades. What he didn't realize was that every move he made from this point on would tighten the rope around his own neck. I sat at my desk, typing the final segment of the trap. It was a fake internal report, written as if by an anonymous whistleblower within the Department of Energy. It described unauthorized access of dormant nuclear control protocols at Site 17, and it listed 2 suspects, Daniel Ross, civilian contractor, and Margaret Lane, retired cryptographer. I uploaded the file to a private server I'd created under a dummy.gov email and made sure Daniel found it by dropping the access code into a folder I knew he'd check, one I'd labeled Decryption Archives. I gave it an enticing name, Red Ledger 87. The moment he opened that file, he'd believe 2 things: first, that someone in the government knew exactly what he was doing, and second, that Margaret had been officially implicated alongside him. That was the final wedge. By 11 a.m., I had eyes on Daniel in the mess hall. He looked like hell, sunken eyes, pale face, jittery hands. Margaret sat across from him, but they didn't speak. He barely ate. He was sweating. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected black-suited agents to burst in and drag him out by force. Good. Now came the physical isolation. That night, I activated the isolation protocols on his living quarters. They were old, but functional. He wouldn't notice anything right away, just that his door keypad glitched for a few seconds longer than normal, or that the lights in his bathroom flickered slightly. But those were breadcrumbs. Psychological irritants. After a few days of escalating fear, the smallest glitch becomes an omen. I disabled his access to the main building shortly after midnight. The system registered him as unauthorized. When he tried to enter the facility the next morning, the scanner buzzed red and locked him out. I watched from the hallway camera as he pounded the panel in frustration. He looked around for help, but the place was nearly empty. Only a handful of us still lived here full-time, and none of them went near the archives. Margaret arrived minutes later, confused at first. He yelled at her. She backed away. She said something, I couldn't hear it, but he shoved her hand away when she tried to touch his arm. That was it. The break. He didn't trust her anymore. And she, finally, saw something in him she hadn't before, a desperation. Fear. A hint of madness. The man she thought she understood, maybe even cared for, had vanished. That afternoon, Daniel packed his bag again. But this time, he didn't sit down. He walked straight out of the compound toward the vehicle depot. I was already there, waiting in the shadows, beside his assigned van. I didn't need to stop him. I only needed to delay him. As he reached for the van's door, a piercing siren blared across the lot. Not real, just a sound loop I triggered from my tablet. But it was enough. Daniel froze. Looked up at the security tower. Then at the camera above the gate. And I spoke through the loudspeaker, just 5 words. Where do you think you're going? He turned pale as death. Dropped his bag. And ran. Ran. Like a coward. Like a man who just realized he wasn't in control of anything anymore. That night, I saw him drinking. Not at the bar, we didn't have one anymore, but alone in the recreation room, at a table near the old pool table. A bottle of whiskey next to him. Half gone. His hands shook as he poured. Margaret didn't visit him. Instead, she came to me. She knocked on the door of my workshop with the timid hesitation of someone who knows she has no right to ask for anything. I need to talk, she said quietly. I didn't let her in. I just stood in the doorway. She looked tired. Ashamed. But I didn't trust her performance anymore. I don't know what's happening, she said. I don't know what he's doing. But I'm scared, Richard. I think he's dangerous. I stared at her. You think? Her lips quivered. He says people are watching him. That someone's coming for him. That there's some kind of cover-up. There is, I said coldly. But it's not what he thinks. Her eyes widened. I could tell she wanted answers, but I gave her none. I simply shut the door in her face. Let them both sit in the dark for a while. Let them feel hunted. I checked the feeds one last time before bed. Daniel was asleep at his desk, the whiskey bottle empty beside him. Margaret had returned to her quarters and locked the door behind her. She sat on her bed, staring at the wall. The pieces were in place. Tomorrow, I would make my move. I woke just before dawn. The sun hadn't crested the hills yet, and the only light in my workshop came from the flickering monitors lining the wall. I sat in the chair with a cup of black coffee, watching the compound as it slept, except Daniel wasn't sleeping. He was pacing again. Twitchy, nervous, muttering to himself. The man was unraveling one thread at a time. It was time to pull them all. The day's plan had already been set. I'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing a final operation, something I called Echelon Drop. It was more than revenge, it was an exhibition. I didn't just want to expose Margaret and Daniel's betrayal. I wanted them to feel it, fully. Publicly. And I wanted them to know that everything, the flickering lights, the surveillance, the files, had been me from the beginning. To execute this, I needed one more illusion. One last bait. I had built a fake system breach, designed to trigger alarms within the declassified parts of the facility. When activated, it would mimic a system-wide intrusion and automatically alert all remaining residents in the compound via public announcement. I rigged it to point the blame toward one place, Ed Daniels' access logs. But before that, I needed Margaret to make a choice. A real one. At 9:32 a.m., I sent her a message from a secure local address. No name. Just a single sentence. Meet me in the South Annex at 10 o'clock. Come alone. I knew she'd come. I'd watched her eyes the night before. She wasn't just scared of Daniel now. She was scared of herself, of what she had become, of how far she'd gone without ever realizing it. That kind of fear makes people desperate for redemption. At 10 o'clock sharp, she walked into the South Annex. It was an old storage bay we'd converted into a temporary operations room back in '86 during a uranium scare. Now, it was empty, except for me and a table with 2 chairs. She sat down without a word. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the surveillance stills, the forged conversations, the document photos, the planted messages, everything. It was a roadmap of her betrayal and the man she had betrayed me for. This is all real, she asked, her voice thin. Some of it, I replied. Enough. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. She paused at one image, her and Daniel, pressed close in the old server room, lips locked, oblivious to the camera above them. I didn't think you knew, she whispered. I always knew. I just wanted to see how far you'd go. She swallowed hard. What are you going to do? I already did it. At that moment, the facility's emergency siren wailed through the compound. Red lights flashed across the walls. Doors automatically sealed. The intercom buzzed to life. Security breach detected. Unauthorized access logged from ID, ADR 471. That was Daniel's employee code. Margaret jumped from her chair, panic in her eyes. What's happening? She gasped. I looked at her coldly. You'll see. As we exited the annex, people had already begun gathering outside. Daniel stood near the control tower entrance, shouting at the keypad that had locked him out again. I didn't do anything, he yelled to no one in particular. This is a mistake. I didn't breach anything. A pair of old security personnel, retired but still maintaining order in the compound, approached him, weapons holstered but ready. They weren't real enforcement, just old colleagues who respected me enough to act on my cue. Sir, we need to talk to you, one of them said. I didn't do anything, Daniel repeated, more frantically now. You've been logged into a restricted protocol chain. Level 5. Nuclear command schematics. His face twisted in disbelief. What? That's not, I never. But I'd already uploaded the evidence to the compound server. Not just the fake documents, but footage, doctored video of him accessing off-limits terminals, screenshots of emails he never sent. It was overwhelming. It was irrefutable. It was a lie, yes, but a perfect one. Margaret stood frozen behind me, watching as Daniel's voice cracked under pressure. "This is a setup," he screamed. "Someone's framing me." He turned to her. Tell them I didn't do anything wrong." She didn't move. Her silence was louder than any accusation. Daniel tried to run. He made it about 15 feet before one of the guards tackled him. They didn't hurt him, just restrained him. Enough to make it real. As they dragged him toward the administrative building, he kept shouting. "You don't understand. There's something in those files. Something big. He did this. Richard did this." I stepped forward. "Yes," I said quietly. "I did." He stared at me, betrayed and wild-eyed. "Why?" "You walked into my house. Slept with my wife. Tried to steal the ghost of a past that never belonged to you. I built this place. You tried to gut it. None of it was real," he shouted. "No," I said. "But your consequences are." The doors shut behind him. I turned to Margaret. She was shaking. Whether from fear, guilt, or shame, I didn't know. I didn't care. "You should leave," I told her. "This place has enough ghosts." She nodded slowly. No words. Just turned and walked away, her shadow stretching long in the red light of the flashing sirens. Back in my workshop, I shut down the alarms. Silence returned. The facility went still. I sat down and closed the final file. Echelon drop, complete. After the sirens faded and the compound returned to its familiar silence, the air itself felt different. Lighter. Calmer. Like the place had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I sat in my chair, the same one I'd occupied for years while watching the systems that used to protect this facility. Now they had served a new purpose, justice. Not the legal kind. The personal kind. Daniel was gone. Technically, he hadn't been arrested. The facility wasn't under federal command anymore, and no real charges had been filed. But his name was ruined. The footage, the emails, the fake protocols, they were convincing enough to make everyone here believe the worst. He was escorted out the next morning, quietly, without protest. Not a soul offered to help him pack. Not even Margaret. I watched from my window as the old compound van pulled away, kicking dust into the morning sun. He didn't look back. He wouldn't be coming back either. Once he was gone, a strange silence settled over the facility, not just literal, but emotional. People whispered. Doors closed more quietly. The few residents who remained stopped asking questions. They knew something had happened, but they didn't want to be part of it. And that suited me just fine. As for Margaret, she stayed. At least for now. The day after Daniel's departure, she knocked on my workshop door again. This time I opened it and let her in. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything she had done had finally started crushing her. She sat across from me without a word, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I know I can't ask for forgiveness," she said after a long silence. "You're right," I said simply. Her lips pressed together, forming a line that used to tremble when she was angry. Now it just looked tired. "I didn't love him," she said. I didn't respond. "I don't even know why I let it happen," she continued. "It wasn't about love. I think it was loneliness. Boredom. Stupidity. Maybe all three. Don't insult me by pretending it matters now, I said. The reasons died the moment you opened that door for him. She nodded slowly, accepting it. At least she didn't argue. I just wanted you to know. I never stopped loving you, she said. That's the part that hurts the most, I replied. Because if that's true, then it means you did this anyway. We sat in silence again. The hum of the old equipment filled the space between us like an unwanted guest. Finally, she stood to leave. I'll be gone by the end of the week, she said. I don't belong here anymore. I said nothing. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. Richard, she said without turning, do you think we ever really knew each other? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure anymore. She left. That night, I walked through the old control room one more time. The consoles were dusty, unused. I ran my fingers across the edges, remembering how we used to sit here, side by side, monitoring signals from around the world. We were part of something then. Something bigger than ourselves. We believed in our work, in each other. Or maybe we just believed in the illusion. The next few days passed quietly. Margaret packed. I avoided her. She avoided me. We shared the same air but not the same space. When the moving van arrived, I didn't watch her leave. I stayed in the back room, pretending to work. When I emerged hours later, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. I expected to feel something, relief, maybe. Victory. But what I felt instead was stillness. A finality that couldn't be undone. Not sadness exactly, but the hollow echo of something that used to matter. Something that used to live in the cracks of my everyday life, now erased completely. In the following weeks, I began dismantling the traps I'd set. The surveillance feeds. The false files. The broadcast system. Not because I regretted any of it, but because I was done. The mission was complete. I had nothing left to prove. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to delete the footage. Not yet. Late one evening, I played back the clip from the control room, Margaret and Daniel, in the shadows, unaware of the camera above. I watched it again and again, until the screen went dark from inactivity. Not because I missed her. But because I wanted to burn the image into my memory, not as a wound, but as a warning. Never let your guard down. Not even after 52 years. Especially after 52 years. The facility still stands, quiet and forgotten. Just me now. Me and the ghosts. I keep the systems running out of habit, maybe out of hope that one day they'll serve a purpose again. Not for vengeance, but for something cleaner. Something that still resembles duty. Or maybe I just don't know how to stop being what they built me to be. A watcher. A guardian. A man who sees the cracks before the walls fall. Whatever the reason, I'm still here. And if anyone else comes through that gate thinking they can rewrite my story, betray me in my own house, or dig up bones that were meant to stay buried, well, they won't make it out either. A week passed. Then another. The silence in the compound had become a second skin, comfortable and familiar. Margaret was gone. Daniel was a ghost. Most of the residents either avoided me or didn't care enough to ask what had really happened. It was perfect. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. One morning, just after sunrise, I received a ping on the old motion sensor grid. It shouldn't have been possible, half the perimeter detectors hadn't worked properly in years. I checked the logs. Movement detected near the north gate. Nothing definitive. A false alarm, probably. Still, I strapped on my boots and walked out across the gravel lot, the sun still low enough to cast long shadows across the compound's skeletal remains. I reached the gate and saw nothing but sand, broken fencing, and a few jackrabbit tracks. No vehicle prints. No people. I was about to head back when I saw it, taped to the inside of the rusted chain-link gate, a plain white envelope, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. My name was written on it. Not Mr. Lane. Not Richard. Just 3 letters, ARL. It was Daniel's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a flash drive and a single sentence, handwritten in rushed ink. You think you're the only one who knows how to build traps? I stood there a long time, letting the words settle in my bones. Then I walked back to the workshop and plugged in the drive, not into my main machine, but into a sandboxed, isolated system I used for testing legacy code. There was one video file. It opened to grainy footage, clearly shot on a hidden camera, maybe from a pen or a button. It was a room I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakable, and Margaret. She was speaking softly, looking around as if paranoid. She spoke of me. About how I'd never let go of the past. How I still monitored everything. How I would never accept that she wanted something different. Something freer. Then another voice joined hers, Daniel. He was calm, collected. Cold. If we can get the files, he said, we won't need to stay in the shadows anymore. His name alone gives the documents weight. All we need is access. Margaret hesitated. He'll never hand them over. Daniel smiled. Then we don't ask. The video ended. I sat there in the dim light of my workshop, the soft whir of the fan the only sound. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I'd suspected something deeper than just an affair, but hearing them speak about me like that, about using me, stripping away my name, my work, my legacy, it reignited something in me I thought had burned out weeks ago. This wasn't over. Daniel hadn't just tried to steal from me. He wanted to erase me. And Margaret, she wasn't just weak. She was complicit. She was the one who gave him the map. The history. The passwords. This wasn't just betrayal of love. It was war. I checked the timestamp on the video. It had been recorded weeks before my first trap. Before I'd known about the affair. Before she'd even started acting distant. Meaning, it hadn't started with temptation. It had started with a plan. They came for me from the beginning. I rose slowly, a different kind of focus setting in. Revenge wasn't enough anymore. This needed to be surgical. A statement. First, I traced the IP address that had pinged the motion sensor. Whoever dropped off that flash drive hadn't just walked in from nowhere. Someone had disabled the outer gate sensor from a remote device, an old tablet that had once been part of our mobile command unit. One I'd thought was lost years ago. Accessing it wasn't hard. The internal registry pinged back to a local signal about 15 miles east of the compound. Daniel was still close. He hadn't run. He'd circled back. And he was watching me. I downloaded the old drone controller system, powered up the primary unit, and set it to scan the surrounding area in a 5-mile radius. Not for people, that would be too slow, but for devices matching the signature of that tablet. Within 10 minutes, I had a match. An old shed near the edge of what used to be the secondary housing area. Half buried under sand and time. Most thought it was just rubble. I knew better. I grabbed my gear and moved out quietly, sticking to the edges, avoiding cameras I hadn't yet disabled. The facility still responded to me. Still obeyed. I reached the shed just after noon. The sun burned overhead, but inside it was cool, dark, and silent. A small solar panel powered a few lights, a laptop, and several transmitters. Daniel wasn't there. But he had been. Recently. On the table was a map of the compound. My compound. Marked with notes. Arrows. Plans. He hadn't just returned to taunt me. He was building something. And whatever it was designed for me. I stood there for several minutes, staring down at the map. Then I gathered every file, every device, and brought them back to the workshop. I locked the doors. Shut off all outside signals. And I sat down. The rules had changed. He thought the game was over. But I hadn't even started playing yet. I didn't sleep that night. The files, the map, the footage, they played on loop in my mind like a warning beacon flashing red. I had underestimated Daniel. He wasn't just a fool who seduced a bored woman. He was a strategist. A parasite with a long game. He had returned to finish what he started. The next morning, I catalogued everything I recovered from the shed. There were no explosive devices, no weapons. But there didn't need to be. His weapon was information. And what he was planning, I realized, wasn't about me. It was about exposure. Among the recovered files, I found drafts of letters, anonymous tip-offs to the media, academic journals, even foreign embassies. Daniel had crafted a narrative, a forgotten government engineer hiding a cache of illegally archived nuclear schematics, security codes, communications logs. Most of it was invented, but he knew just enough to make it sound real. My name was all over those drafts. He was going to turn me into a national scandal. It wasn't just revenge. He wanted to drag me into the light, take everything I'd protected, everything I'd buried, and burn it in public view. He wasn't after Margaret anymore. He wasn't even after the secrets. He wanted to destroy the idea of me. The man who knew everything and controlled everything, undone by the very paranoia he had cultivated. But I wasn't done either. If he wanted to play this as a war of exposure, I would answer with erasure. I began by deleting every digital footprint he had planted. The servers I'd created to store my fake documents were wiped. The drone feeds rerouted. The security logs altered. All references to Daniel Russ inside the system were replaced with corrupted placeholder strings, mimicking system decay. To the naked eye, it would look like old hardware erasing old ghosts. But that wasn't enough. If he was going to use my identity as a weapon, I needed to make sure that identity stayed intact, for me, and only me. That meant reclaiming the only thing I'd never truly secured, the narrative. I went into the archives. The real ones. The ones deep below the old nuclear lab, where physical tapes and analog records still sat in dust-sealed lockers. Most hadn't been touched in decades. I pulled out the footage, the signed mission reports, the recordings of debriefings, proof of my work, my loyalty, and my silence. I digitized it all. Scanned it. Organized it into one massive timeline, with annotations. Not for the government. Not for the press. For me. A record that if anyone, one day, tried to question who I was or what I did, there'd be no doubt. Daniel wanted to rewrite my story. I was going to write it in stone. The next phase required bait. I wanted him to know that I'd found the shed. That I'd seen the letters. That I'd erased everything. I wanted him rattled. Rushed. So I sent him a single message, via the same anonymous channel he'd used to contact me. "You're not a ghost, Daniel. You never were. You left footprints in my house. I've burned them now. But I know you're still watching." I attached one file, an image of his own map, shredded and burned, placed on the desk in the old control room. 2 hours later, motion sensors tripped again. This time from the east corridor, a part of the facility he had no reason to revisit. Except that's where the hardline terminal still sat today. The only computer in the entire place that wasn't connected to any wireless network. Old. Cold. But impenetrable from outside interference. He'd come back for it. I watched him through the hidden camera as he entered cautiously, glancing over his shoulder. His face was gaunt. His clothes hung loose, he hadn't been eating well. Or sleeping. Good. That's how you dismantle men like Daniel. Not by yelling. Not with fists. But slowly. Patiently. He booted up the machine. Typed fast. Probably trying to retrieve something I'd already wiped. I let him work. Let him dig deeper and deeper, believing he was about to unearth something vital. Then I shut the lights. A total blackout. Not just the room, but the entire corridor. Manual override from my control desk. Emergency lighting didn't kick in. Battery backups were dead. I made sure of that. He panicked. I watched through infrared. He stumbled from the desk, groped at the door. But I had sealed it. Not locked, just enough resistance to make it feel like a tomb. Then I played the audio, my voice, distorted and cold, from an old recording I'd once used during an evacuation drill. This facility has been compromised. Secure all assets. Eliminate internal threats. It wasn't a threat. It was theater. A closing act. Daniel collapsed in the corner, knees drawn to his chest, muttering to himself. I let him stay there for 20 minutes, then restored power. The lights blinked back on. The door released. I didn't confront him. I didn't speak. I let the silence follow him out as he stumbled away like a man haunted. He left the compound later that night. This time, for good. I watched the GPS signal from his tablet fade into the desert, then vanish. And I knew he wouldn't be back. Because he'd finally understood what I'd tried to teach him from the beginning. This was my house. And I decide who leaves. The days that followed Daniel's final departure passed with a strange, almost surreal quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the kind that settles after a storm, when the debris is still scattered and the air smells faintly of something burned. The compound was intact, systems operational, lights steady, but beneath the surface, something had shifted forever. I had won. But victories like this don't come without a price. There was no celebration. No relief. Only the stillness that comes when you realize that everything you fought to protect is now yours, but changed. Hollowed. Margaret was gone. Daniel was gone. And I remained. The last piece of the old world, still watching, still waiting. I spent my mornings walking the perimeter, inspecting the old infrastructure. Rusting pipelines. Cracked concrete. Weather-worn security cameras. This place had once been a fortress of knowledge, secrets, and cold purpose. Now it was a tomb with working lights. And I was its keeper. It occurred to me that I hadn't spoken to another person in days. The few remaining residents of the compound had grown used to my silence, to my distance. They nodded politely when they passed me on the walkways, but none stopped to ask how I was or where Margaret had gone. They didn't want the answers. And I wasn't offering any. On the fifth morning, I stood on the edge of the northern ridge, staring out across the desert. The wind kicked up dust devils in the distance. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried into the sky. For a moment, I felt the vastness of it all, the loneliness, yes, but also the freedom. There were no more threats. No more secrets to guard. I had dismantled them all, burned the fakes, locked away the truths. And yet, one final question remained. Why had I kept the tape? I told myself it was for protection. That the recording of Margaret and Daniel plotting behind my back was insurance, a reminder, a tool if I ever needed to expose them. But that was a lie. I knew at the moment I asked myself the question. I kept the tape because I couldn't stop watching it. Not out of pain. Not out of anger. But fascination. How had she done it? How had she looked me in the eye all those mornings, kissed me goodnight, told me she loved me, while quietly laying the groundwork for my downfall? The way she leaned toward Daniel in the recording. The way her voice dropped when she mentioned my name. The casual malice, the quiet intent. It wasn't just betrayal. It was transformation. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had shared, it had all been real, and yet not. And the longer I stared at that fact, the more I realized, and maybe it had always been there. The resentment. The restlessness. She'd buried it well. But it had roots. So I watched the tape again. And this time, I didn't look at her face. I looked at mine. Not literally, I wasn't in the video. But I imagined myself as I must have been then, completely unaware. The fool. The relic. The man who built a kingdom and never realized someone else was sketching the escape plan in pencil behind his back. And I saw it clearly. I had failed to see her. I saw everything else. Threats. Patterns. Lies. But I missed the person standing next to me. I had become so obsessed with preserving what we had built that I never noticed she'd already started tearing it down. That was the true cost of vigilance. It blinds you to the betrayal inside the walls. That night, I took the tape outside. I brought it to the old burn pit at the edge of the complex, a place we used for incinerating outdated records, damaged equipment, paper waste. I hadn't used it in years. I stood there for a long time, holding the small case in my hands. The wind tugged at my coat, the desert stars staring down without judgment. Then I threw it in. The flames caught quickly, hungrily. The plastic crackled, curled, melted into black ooze. The image of them, the sound of their voices, it all vanished into the night, replaced by smoke and silence. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. Not joy. Not forgiveness. Just an end. Back in the workshop, I powered down most of the systems. Closed off access points. Cleared logs. I wasn't erasing history, I was sealing it. Locking the door on a chapter that had cost me everything, so that nothing and no one could open it again. I left one screen active. A live feed from the front gate. Just in case. Because the world doesn't end in fire or silence. It ends when you stop watching. And I would never stop watching. It was 3 weeks later when the letter arrived. No return address. No postage. Just a plain envelope slipped under the metal door of my workshop sometime in the early morning hours. The air outside was still, the dust undisturbed, and the cameras hadn't caught a thing. Whoever left it knew the blind spots better than I like to admit. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, perfectly square. The handwriting was familiar. Precise. Feminine. Margaret. I sat at the edge of my desk for a long time before I opened it. I wasn't afraid of what it might say, there was nothing left to fear. But there was a part of me, small and quiet, that still held onto curiosity. The same part that once loved her. The note was brief. 5 sentences. Richard. I've left the country. Somewhere quiet. No one knows where. I'm not coming back. I hope you can find peace in the silence, the way you always did. Goodbye. No apology. No explanation. Just the facts, cold and distant, like the woman I once thought I knew. I folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not for safekeeping. Just so it wouldn't be underfoot. She was gone. And now it was truly over. That evening, I stood in the control room one final time. The monitors were dark, save for the gate feed. The chair I used to sit in during briefings was still in the corner, the same dent in the cushion from years of habit. Everything in this room had once mattered. Now, it was a museum. A shell. And I was its last exhibit. The facility no longer needed me. I shut down the primary console, flicked the safety on the backup generator, and removed the final manual key from the ignition slot on the wall. The hum of machinery ceased. For the first time in decades, the silence was absolute. I locked the control room door and walked out into the open night. The stars above the desert stretched like an ocean of pinpricks. The sand beneath my boots was cool. A soft wind whispered across the barracks and utility buildings, rustling old cables like wind chimes long forgotten. I made my way to the north fence, where my old pickup still sat, its paint faded, its tires dry but intact. I hadn't started it in months, maybe years, but the keys were in the ignition. I turned them slowly. The engine coughed twice. Then it roared. I didn't take anything with me. No files. No letters. No souvenirs. I left it all behind. Because what I'd built here, this fortress of memory, pain, and revenge, had served its purpose. It was done. I drove out through the same gate Daniel once tried to flee through. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. The desert stretched endlessly in front of me, a road lined with silence, lit only by the faint glow of a half-moon. I drove until the compound disappeared from my rearview mirror, until the horizon swallowed it whole. Eventually, I reached a small town. A place with one gas station, one diner, and no one who knew my name. I rented a room above the diner. Cash only. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She handed me a key, gave me a tired smile, and went back to counting her register. I sat in the room that night and looked out over the empty street. The room was plain. One bed. One window. A fan on the ceiling. But the silence here was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't watching me. It just was. And for the first time in a long time, I let it be. The next morning, I bought a small notebook from the corner store and sat at the diner counter with a cup of black coffee. I opened to the first page and wrote a single sentence. I outlived the ghosts. I didn't write more. Not yet. But maybe one day, I will. Maybe one day I'll tell the whole story, not as a warning, not as a confession, but simply as the truth. Because truth, in the end, is the only thing left when everything else is gone. Until then, I'll sit here, drink my coffee, and watch the sun rise over a world that finally feels like it's mine again.